Sarah Croker and Stuart who will return later with some more melodies. Welcome everybody to this Limerick Writers Centre event. It's the launch of a new collection of stories from Edward O'Dwyer, for those who are for those not too familiar with Edward. He is a celebrated poet and author from Limerick. With a taste for blending reality and imagination, O'Dwyer's works have garnered attention for their transformative narratives and captivating prose. He is the author of one other collection of stories, Sheets, as the night gets on, it gets harder to say, and of 3 collections of poetry from Salmon Poetry. Tonight we launch his second collection of stories, The Man Who Became Poems. First, a word from Dominic Taylor, director of the Limerick Writers Centre.
Thank you everybody for coming here tonight. And what I can say is a very special occasion, the publication of The Man Who Became Poems, a captivating new collection of stories by our talented writer friend Edward O'Dwyer. We find ourselves in the esteemed Harris Suite of the Strand Hotel, a fitting setting named after the legendary Richard Harris, a man of many talents, from actor to poet, writer to proud Limerick native. And like Harris, Edward, who may not be the hell-raising extrovert, but they've got something in common. They both listen to that inner voice, telling them to create some crazy stories that blur the line between what's real and what's made up. I'm proud to say that I have known Edward since his early foray into the world of writing at Limerick's White House Bar, sometime around 2006. The White House has long been a haven for nurturing writers and artists of diverse backgrounds. Edwards has since evolved and gained recognition for his unique work, both at home and abroad. Tonight, we celebrate the publication of his second book of stories, a significant milestone, and the 153rd publication from the Limerick Writers Centre under our community publishing programme. Much like Edward's journey, our origins can be traced back to that pivotal reading series initiated by the late Barney Sheehan in 2003 at the White House Bar. Over the years, we have actively encouraged writers, those who pursue a serious career, as well as those who write for personal pleasure, healing, growth, insight, or simply to inform. Our endeavours have yielded a rich tapestry of writing, encompassing poetry, history, memoir, and general prose. So just to finish up, I hope you enjoy these creative and thought-provoking stories from Edward. From the title story, The Man Who Became Poems, where he explores themes of identity, acceptance, and the power of art, to the darkly humorous and intriguing perspective in the last story in the book, he plagiarized my dreams of the creative process itself. I believe that everyone can take something of value from reading these stories. But to wrap up, I'd just like to thank our guest, Tanya Farrelly, who will officially launch the book. I'd also like to thank the Strand Hotel for providing the Harris Suite for us to launch it in. And I'd like to say a word of thanks to our book designer, Lot Bender, who's been, for the past 10 years, designing our books and making them look professional. And of course, to all our volunteers and supporters over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Tanya Farrelly is an accomplished author with 4 published books to her name, including 2 collections of short fiction, When Black Dogs Sing, awarded the Kate O'Brien Award in 2017. And Nobody Needs to Know, as well as two gripping psychological thrillers titled The Girl Behind the Lens and When Your Eyes Close, published by HarperCollins. She holds a PhD in creative and critical writing from Bangor University in Wales and served as writer in residence at LUI Galway in 2021. Tanya has been recognised with an Arts Council Agility Award, I could do one of those myself, and is currently immersed in the creation of a new historical fiction. Enough orthopaedic gags. Ladies and gentlemen, Tanya Farrelly to launch this shindig. Tanya.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to Edward. I'm so delighted to be here to launch his latest masterpiece, and it was very well researched, so thank you very much. So a few things I want to say. A lot of you have probably seen the book already, and if not, you've probably read Edward's cheat sheets, and you know that something that he specialises in is very short fiction, which we sometimes call flash fiction, which would be stories of, say, under 1,000 words. This is not all flash fiction in this collection. There are longer stories as well, but I teach a lot of creative writing, and flash fiction is something I've given some classes in, and it's one of those genres that it's still under debate about kind of what it is. And I remember I was preparing to give a class on it, and I bought a book from Rose Metal Press, and it was a book of essays by flash fiction practitioners saying what they felt it was or what they thought it was. And a lot of them had things in common, so I sort of was looking for the common threads of what they all believed it was. And most of them said that while longer form fiction is preoccupied with character and plot, short form fiction or flash fiction is more preoccupied with imagery and with language. So some people think that it's closer to poetry. Maybe this is why it appeals to Edward, I'm not sure. But there was a lovely piece in that book that by UK writer Vanessa Gebbie. And she wrote this little piece, and it almost reads like a piece of flash fiction itself. And I'd like to just read that out because I think it really sums up some of the stories in Edward's collection. And she called this little piece Fireworks. So she's basically just explaining what she thinks flash fiction is and what it should do. So Fireworks, Vanessa Gebbie. You are outside in the dark, just a star or two. Somewhere there are the sounds of a party on the other side of the street, the beat of a disco, heightened talk, shouts, laughter. It is easy to turn away, leave that behind, go back into the house. Then, a firework. A single crack splits the air, a sizzle, a pause, a burst of stars, shimmering, falling in a fountain against the sky. The stars spiral and fall, painting the sky with trails of light. Then it is over. You blink. But no, it is not over. Imprinted on your retina is a fountain of fire. That is what a good flash ought to do. It should catch you as you turn away, hold you, and when you've finished reading, it should echo and resonate. I wanted to read that piece tonight because while I was reading through the stories and rereading them, I thought that is exactly what Edward's stories do. So this is a collection of fireworks. So you read them and you remember them. They're really, really memorable stories. And because they're short, you may feel you just want to fly through them. It's very easy to sit down and read a whole bunch of these stories together, but I would urge you not to. I felt I just had to take a little break between each one and think about it. I'm going to move on to say that I put up a post on social media recently where I described Edward's new collection as Kafka meets Black Mirror. And I stand by that. So, let me justify my comment. Kafka, first of all, I liked what you said there actually about Edward's fiction blending reality and imagination. For those of you who know Edward very well, I'm sure you know, as I do, you probably thought that these were all autobiographical and 100% true, of course. Not. But these are not realist stories. I suppose we would consider them to be absurdist stories. And anyone who's read Kafka, I remember recommending arguably Kafka's most well-known story to Edward a long time ago, which was The Metamorphoses. And I had a feeling he hadn't read it actually, and I just confirmed that last night. He hasn't read it yet. So there's no imitation whatsoever going on here. But the reason why fiction like Kafka's works so well in this absurdist way is because it's grounded firmly in reality. So it makes it accessible, it makes it easy to read, and it also makes it easier to digest, maybe. The Metamorphoses begins with the protagonist, Gregor Samsa, waking in the morning to find that he's been transformed into a giant insect. How weird is that? But what Kafka does is he tells the story in a very normal, mundane way. So Samsa wonders, how am I going to get out of bed today? How am I going to get to the office? He's a salesman. How am I going to go about and sell my products? Like, it's all very normal stuff, that all of us would consider. And that's why it works. We can just suspend our disbelief and go with it and roll with it and enjoy it. And Edward does the same thing. And I think it's very apt that the title story is The Man Who Became Poems, which reminds me very, very much of Kafka's Metamorphoses. Rather than waking up and finding himself transformed into a giant insect, our hero in Edward's story wakes up to find that his right arm has been transformed into a poem. And we go with that, and we enjoy that. And I think that's what you have to do in absurdist fiction. You don't question it, you just say, okay, what's happening here? Where's this going to go? And so the story goes on, and more of his body parts become poems. I don't like talking about other people's fiction, especially at launch, because I don't want to give any spoilers. But this story, the title story, is about transformation, is one of the themes, and as you mentioned other themes. And I think the theme of transformation runs right through this collection. And the reason I urge you to read them slowly is because I felt there were much deeper meanings in a lot of these stories. Another reason absurdist fiction like Kafka's works well is because the language seems simple and direct, but don't be fooled by that. There are deep questions here. I wasn't surprised to come across the story called A Girl Named Existentialism, because I was actually thinking there were some existentialist themes in these stories while I was reading, even though it was kind of a send-up, really, on people who consider themselves to be existentialist in that particular story. Black Mirror. Why do I mention Black Mirror? One of my favourite stories in this collection is the woman who stayed at home to watch TV. And when I read that, I just thought, this is exactly like an episode of Black Mirror. And there are quite a lot of stories in the collection like that as well. I'm teaching a course at the moment which is called Fact and Fiction, because there's such an interest in writing personal essays and creative non-fiction these days. And when I was putting my own last collection together, it occurred to me that there were a lot of truths in the fictional stories that I write. And I think that's true of a lot of writers, that they can be inspired by something that actually happened. But that's not a story. Say if it was 100% true, that would be an essay. Where it becomes a story is when you ask the question, what if? So you base a story partially on something that happened, but then you ask, what if the outcome had been different? And what Edward does, because he's not saying this is real, this is happening, this has happened, he is taking that what if to extremes. And this works so well in realist fiction, we're asking what if, and we look at the possibilities. When Edward asks what if, he's looking at the impossibilities, but we go with them. So there's a story in this collection which I particularly love as well, called The Woman Who Jogged at Sunrise. And it's a theme, the main theme of it is freedom. So this woman starts off by dumping her handbag in a river with her bank cards and her phone and all her personal possessions because she wants to feel free. But that doesn't work for her. So she's looking for something else. She thinks, okay, escape from material matter isn't going to give me freedom. She starts running, as a lot of people do, for therapeutic reasons, I think. And she runs at sunrise and she feels great freedom in this. And suddenly that's not enough, because everybody else sees what she's doing and they decide to do it too, and suddenly she's not alone at sunrise running. So she thinks, okay, my skin is actually trapping me, so I'm going to turn myself inside out, I'm going to flip my body, I'm going to wear my organs, veins, sinews, the whole lot on the outside. And for a while she feels freedom in that. Until everybody else imitates her and does the same thing again. And eventually she discards her body altogether and finds the greatest freedom in that. And there's just beautiful imagery in this story. The imagery is fantastic, where she is no longer in her corporeal body and she becomes just a shimmer. And that was a story I really had to stop and think about, because it felt like the shimmer was the soul. And was there a theological message in this story? So there's really interesting messages in all of these stories. Most of the characters are unnamed in Edward's fiction as well. There's a lot of titles that are the woman who or the man who, and I think this makes it very universal as well, that people can sort of identify with this every man or every woman, especially because of the intimate tone in which he tells the stories as well. A lot of them are in first person too. But I'm not here to talk all night. I'm here to introduce my great friend, Edward O'Dwyer, and to wish him the very best with The Man Who Became Poems. And I wasn't even going to attempt to read anything from this book because there's no one who's going to do it as well as he is. So, ladies and gentlemen, Edward O'Dwyer.
Before I forget, actually, to explain the shimmer and where I stole it, because let's be honest, every writer is a thief. You might all have seen the original Predator film. Do you know when they think they see the Predator kind of running around them? It's that really unusual shimmer in the light. I blatantly stole that from Predator. I didn't thank them for it either. Which leads me to acknowledgements. So I have a lot of people to thank for this book, and well, I suppose firstly I'll thank every one of you for being here, and for spending your Monday evening at the launch of the book Short Stories. So I thank you for that. In particular, of course, I want to thank Dominic Taylor, Limerick Writers Centre, for all the work that they put into it, for believing in the book as well, because, let's be honest, that's all you want as a writer. You want somebody to believe in the book. So thank you. Thank you, of course, to Tanya Farrelly for that wonderful introduction to the book, and I have to steal some of those for kind of references in the future. But yeah, what a fabulous presentation. Thank you. thank Marianne for sending all those books. I also want to thank all the family for being here as well. For come out every time. So this is my 5th time doing one of these book launches now, and they continue to come out and support me, and that's phenomenal as well. So thank you. What do you think? Will I read? Okay. Thank you very much, Tom, as well, for telling me to horse into it. Okay, so I was reading. I was kind of reading bits of stories, wondering what I was going to read tonight. I didn't. There's so many that I could read. I have so many favourites from it. I really love the stories in this book, so it kills me not to read some of them. Then there's some of them that I'm just not willing to read in front of my parents. They can read them in their own time. But yeah, no, there's just definitely just a few passages, a few lines that I couldn't possibly get through in front of them. So I tried reading this one earlier to my transition year students, just kind of seeing what they thought, if I should read it or not. Just at the end of the class, I said, put your books away, I want to try something out. And they were like, yeah, no, go on, yeah, read it, definitely. It's called My Father's Coffin. Now, my father is here, he's fine. I think he's fine, yeah, he's fine. So as Tanya mentioned, these stories, they don't really deal in reality.
What's reality?
Exactly, Tom. Which is exactly why I don't deal in it.
We're all existentialists here, buddy.
So this one is My Father's Coffin. I can remember watching it all, and yes, being fascinated by the spectacle, its improbability. I can remember so vividly he and a few of the neighbours bringing it in, how they had it hoisted onto their shoulders, and how sweat gleamed on their brows and their shirts began to cling to them, patches of sticky translucence appearing and darkening. I can remember the sound of heavy breath, their exertion. Mother was standing next to me at the time, but not facing it, not at first. She turned around to see what all the commotion was. There was no shortage of it. They set it down on the kitchen table, which I'd only just cleared and was about to set with plates and cutlery for dinner. I can remember some hands reaching for the wall, men rebalancing themselves. There was weight in it, of course. I looked at my father's coffin, and then I looked at my father. He was in the prime of his life, or at least not very much beyond its prime. Not enough to make a point of it. I watched him as he stood back and grinned at it, admiring it the way men in films admire a new sports car, or a beautiful woman in a billowy dress welcoming the wind's flirtations. My father was making plans to be dead, it seemed. It may seem a very ludicrous thing for a healthy man to shop for his own coffin, and then for him to grin so admiringly at it, the way he did, but my father had always been capable of doing ludicrous things, and so the word hardly applied to him or the things he did anymore. I remember the neighbours all left to hearty thanks from him. They all flapped and waved their hands in the air to receive his gratitude, and then they filed out, fanning themselves, making sure it was known that they had perspired on his account. It was the three of us left in the kitchen then, a family. I have imagined those men, once outside, the door closing and sealing us inside, their laughter as one of them mentioned something about my father needing that coffin sooner than he bargained for. I have imagined them all laughing at this the way only a group of men can laugh, as though they are trying to shake the hills sitting immovably in the distance. I was 8 years old, much too young to be watching my father grinning so happily at his own coffin. Nonetheless, these are the simple facts of the matter. It was half price. Can you believe that? He announced, as though to a packed auditorium. And then he brought his hand down on it with rough enthusiasm. He sounded so excited, was giving the impression he was already looking forward to being dead in it. Isn't she a beauty? My mother, I saw, was shaking with anger. I could even feel it. I swear I can remember the molecules in the very air around her, pinging about, felt them pelting me, exerting their tiny forces on my skin. I had a sense in the moment, if only a childish one, of all the fury her body was holding inside it, and that had to come out. And a perfect fit too, my father chirped. Like a glove, so it is. Still, there was no response but her silent seething. I tried it on in the store, he went on, like it was a suit or a pair of shoes. The salesman said it looked great on me. Or was it I looked great in it, he said. I forget. My father laughed then, really laughed. And for a split second I desperately wanted to join in, to laugh along with him, but I didn't dare do it, knowing it would be a terrible mistake, knowing I would be letting my mother down. Are you dying, is that it? She finally asked him, the volume of her voice low, but the words ice. Because you'd better be. I stared at the coffin until, before long, it took my attention completely, and I wondered why it was so beautifully crafted, why it needed to be so splendidly finished. What was the point? That was something that troubled me about coffins back then, and it still does trouble me to an extent. I mean, why would dead people be so interested in being dead inside such exquisite carpentry, and only to be shoved beneath the ground, out of the way? What did it matter at all? The cold, soggy earth was the cold, soggy earth after all, wasn't it? It was such weird territory, death. I was learning then, and I can't say it has gotten any less weird the more I understand of it, or think I understand of it, because death really has a wonderful knack of throwing up new questions all the time, new curiosities, new discomfort. My father, very suddenly, clutched at his heart and dropped down onto the floor in a performance that would not see him among the Oscar nominations that year. I can remember the hammy nuances of his overacting, of his body in mock spasms on the floor before going still, and his eyes wide and bulging and pointed up at the ceiling. He laughed again then, another booming laugh, but there was no temptation in me to join in with him on this occasion. My mother turned back to the dinner she had been preparing. It was just potluck. She had onions to hand, and lots of them. If they'd been carrots or courgettes or anything but onions, well, then it would have just been weeping. She was given that small fortune. We ate our dinner that night and pretended that my father's coffin wasn't taking over the table. I remember my mother looking over it at one point and asking me to pass her the salt. And so I handed it to her as though there was nothing unusual, as though there was no reason but distance for why she wasn't able to reach it herself. My father was very much alive the next morning, and his coffin was still on the kitchen table, unable still to fulfill its purpose. He was making a fry for breakfast and singing, and at some moments he was playing guitar solos with the spatula. "Can't you take it back?" my mother said finally, pouring coffee for herself. I remember she was wearing her dressing gown with all the giant bees on it. It was ghastly, but somehow it worked anyway. Other than the giant bees, it was sky blue, very much my mother's colour. "No returns," my father said. "Not on sale items." Just like being dead, I thought, and shoveled a spoonful of cereal into my mouth. There were no returns then either. I chewed open-mouthed, made crunching noises. It was already the sizzling of rashers and eggs in the pan, and the radio at low to moderate volume. These other noises all seemed useful, seemed a small balm against the tension. "It can't stay on the kitchen table," my mother warned. No, my father agreed. No, of course not. So where? She asked. She seemed to me to have eased up just ever so slightly on the very hard line she'd drawn the previous evening against the coffin. Maybe she'd given it more thought and decided to kill him. And just needed a good place to store it while she came up with the plan to do so. The neighbours would affirm he had brought home his own coffin, and so no foul play would be expected. There would only be the dying of a man who was expecting to die. "You're always saying the coffee table isn't long enough," my father said. This was true. I'd heard her say it several times. It was a real sore point with her. Her explanation was that if all the chairs were occupied, not everyone could use the coffee table for its intended purpose, or not, at least, without having impossibly long arms. Arms of such a length that they would trail along the floor while walking. They were most unlikely and impractical arms. The coffee table really wasn't long enough, and in saying so, my father had an exceptionally valid point. "So your idea is to put it in the living room?" my mother snapped. And I thought the giant bees on her dressing gown might come to life and attack him, riddle his body with fatal stings. "It's an idea, it's all I mean," he reasoned. "It could be a whimsical solution to your coffee table problem, that's all." I think he knew he had won there and then. The smirk that came suddenly to his face was his winner's medal, as the toaster spat some golden brown slices of bread into the air. "Just think of your book club meetings," he expounded. And I saw it then, saw the hint of a maybe, just maybe, in her eyes. By the end of breakfast, no more than 30 minutes later, she was planning a trip into town to shop for tablecloths, and so it was settled. And my father was allowed to keep his coffin, despite being in the prime of his life or thereabouts. She arrived home later that afternoon with new tablecloths and new coasters for the tea and coffee, and sure enough, the coffin would be long enough for everyone in her book club to use it comfortably for a coffee table. When the third Thursday of the month came around, the members all complimented her on the boldness of her decorating before they got down to discussing death in the latest book about death that they picked to read. It's one of the details that eludes me. I'm sure the irony wasn't lost on them. My mother came quickly to love coffee table as it happened. Her coffee intake increased significantly, and her time spent in the living room increased significantly, and I had no doubt about why. She loved it so much that when my father did finally die, many years later, she bought him a new coffin. And a very nice one. She was sure he'd be equally content to be a corpse for all eternity inside. "It's a coffee table," she always tells me, "not a coffin." And she's quite right. It has held her coffee all these years, and nothing else. Is it possible not to get a glass of water? So a very, very short, this is the shortest story in the book. Tanya mentioned it actually. It's the blind woman on her 100th birthday. I think it's a nice one to read because I kind of imagine it takes place in a room a bit like this one. I'm hoping it's not going to be prophetic, but we're all in trouble if it is. So yeah, here we go. Blind woman on her. Oh, thank you. Siri, you're solving every problem tonight.
Didn't say that.
Okay, so the blind woman on her 100th birthday. Her family and friends sing to her. They could be an auditioning choir. They all gather around her, all of them smartly dressed, as a cake with 100 lighting candles is brought closer and closer, carried by 2 staff members, faces full of embarrassment, who place it in front of her and hurry away. Today is the woman's 100th birthday. It's an event, Even the mayor is here to have his photograph taken with her. She has received a birthday card through the mail from the president. It's signed with an ink stamp, but still, perhaps he stamped it himself. Perhaps the slight little smudge is his. Blow out the candles, one of the children says, full of giddy excitement. He is itching to blow them out himself, so there is a firm hand gripping his shoulder, just in case he might actually do it. Make a wish, another of them calls out. Yeah, another joins in. The woman lets out the full force of her lungs as the cameras are clicking and clicking, people jostling for preferred angles. The local newspaper has sent over some people with comically large cameras. The candles all go out, and as they do, so does every light in the world. The lights in Japan, Brazil, Italy, and everywhere else you can think of. There is nowhere that isn't left in total darkness. The world is as though light has just been uninvented, and so the applause never really gets going. It begins, yes, but then everyone quickly realizes there is something very wrong. The power on the TV screens is also gone, and nobody's phone is offering any light to the situation. Nobody's. A man reaches into his pocket for a cigarette lighter, but it makes only the scratchy sound between his fingers. There is no light from it when he tries it again and again. The moonlight coming through the windows would be something, but even the moon has opted to vanish. The moon, somehow, is gone. What have you done? Someone asks the woman. I made a wish, the woman says and sighs. I wished to be able to see what all of you can see, but as usual, it hasn't come true. So, I think I have to read the title story. So the book is called The Man Who Became Poems. After the first story in the book, and look, some of you have heard the story before, but there's a lot of you that haven't. It tends to be a favourite for people. So hopefully those of you who haven't heard it, you don't mind hearing it again. So I will. This will be the last one, unless you start like screaming that one more, and it becomes and I feel maybe I feel backed into a corner. Oh, well, that part's taken care of. Okay. So yeah, the Man Who Became Poems. It was time to get up. The noise the alarm clock was making said so. Like he did every other morning, the man reached out to quench the commotion it was making, but this time nothing happened. The clock carried on with its wailing. It got more and more insistent. I will not be ignored, the clock seemed to be screaming at the man, though he wasn't ignoring it. The man opened up his drowsy eyes fully to scrutinize his hand. He realized the problem straight away. It wasn't a hand at all anymore. Nor was his arm an arm anymore. The whole limb of his left arm had changed into a poem while he was sleeping. He looked at the poem. The man stretched it out in front of him. It was a poem he'd never heard of, he was sure, but then he didn't know very many poems. He finally silenced the alarm with his right hand and proceeded into the kitchen, from where he could hear bacon sizzling and smell a fresh pot of coffee brewing. His wife was there, a spatula in her hand, her arms and legs bare. None of her limbs had become poems. I thought I'd make you a nice breakfast, the man's wife announced. You know, since your arm has turned into a poem, I figured a nice breakfast might help to cheer you up. The man thanked her with a kiss and sat at the table. It surely wouldn't return his limb to him, but he was nonetheless hungry and due soon at work. When he got to work, the man was conscious of his colleagues giving him funny looks. They were trying their utmost not to gawk, but the constant quick glances down at the poem were every bit as bad, if not worse. I sure hope you don't think you'll be getting any special treatment now that one of your arms has turned into a poem, his boss roared across the room, and then he slammed shut the door of his office. The week went by, and the man had begun to adjust successfully to his new anatomical circumstances. He'd read the poem as well. He was confident it might even be a wonderful piece of literature, although he wouldn't claim to know a great deal about such things. He just knew that he thought the words very beautiful, their music, their arrangement. The man got out of bed precisely a week later and collapsed onto the floor in a heavy heap. For some reason, he hadn't managed to support himself. He yelped loudly with the pain. He looked down to identify what the problem was. It was very clear, so it didn't take more than a second. His right leg wasn't a leg anymore. It had become another poem. His wife came into the room to help him up. She had with her an old crutch she'd retrieved out of storage. "What the hell is going on?" the man asked her. "Your limbs are turning into poems," his wife explained, as sympathetically as she possibly could. What else could she say in such a moment other than the blatantly obvious? Some more weeks went by, and each Monday morning another part of the man's body was transformed into a poem. One of his ears turned into a haiku. Where his penis used to be, there was only an elegy. It's probably only a matter of time before there's nothing left of me but a bunch of poems, the man said to his wife. She held him, drying her eyes intermittently with a tissue so that the ink of the poems wouldn't run or smudge. They were all wonderful poems after all. She didn't want to ruin them. An English literature professor from a prestigious university had returned very high praise when the man had emailed her a photograph of the poem which had replaced his right leg. The man decided his next move must be to get the insurance company on the phone. He needed to know that his wife would be taken care of. Though their kids were grown up, it was still crucial that she have enough to live well. He should have called them up a long time ago, he knew, before he'd even started turning into poems. "I am very sorry, sir, but we cannot insure you," the agent told him. "Our company policy is very clear on this. We cannot provide insurance to persons whose body parts are turning into poems. This is all in black and white in our terms and conditions, which you can read on our website. It's just too much of a risk, as I'm sure you can appreciate." "I see your point," the man sighed, shaking his head in disappointment. "Well, thank you for your time." He hung up the phone and focused the last of his energy on fighting back the tears on the brink of breaking out. There wasn't a lot else he could do, he realized. He'd just have to face the facts and reassess his options. He made an appearance to be interviewed on national television, meaning to make a go at telling the world of his affliction. He felt it his duty at this point to raise awareness. The studio audience cheered raucously when he was brought out, when the pages of his body were laid across a desk set up on the stage. The man's condition was suddenly all that people could talk about. Billions of people across the world were discussing the poems that had replaced so much of his anatomy, sharing their thoughts about his predicament over social media. There was great demand, and so he went on another popular show, this time of international renown, and recited what used to be his left arm. He recited it beautifully. Uncountable numbers from around the globe tuned in as he did. Then, one Monday morning, the man's face became a sonnet, and it was over. He had stopped breathing. You can't breathe anymore, not when your face has become a sonnet. It's as simple as that. The man was pronounced dead. His wife had known all along that it was coming, but it hadn't made it any easier. She wasn't ready at all. When all that was left of her husband was his face, even then, she wasn't ready to say goodbye. Nonetheless, he was completely gone. In their bed on that Monday morning was just a collection of poems, admittedly the most beautiful poems she'd ever read. Publishers started calling her up to pay their condolences soon after the funeral. They had plans to print a collection, to sell it, to translate it into all the major languages of the world. Her husband would become the most successful poetry collection of all time, they said. She would become an exceedingly wealthy woman, they said. I have no desire to be wealthy, the woman told each and every one of the publishers. I just want my husband back, and publishing his body of work will never bring him back to me, no matter how many copies you sell. Instead, she learned all the poems off by heart, and then set fire to them. And then she scattered the ashes in the place they had first declared their love to one another. The wind took the ashes, she took the words. She recites the poems to herself at night in the bed they shared for so many years. In the dark, the words, like an incantation, bring him back to her. The words, as she speaks them, assemble at his side of the bed. From there, next to where she lays, she hears the soft coo of his breath, rising and falling, rising and falling. Should I brace myself?
No, no,
Okay.
That was Edward O'Dwyer, a man who became poems. Some of you, including me, are painfully aware of the eye-watering content of that particular ditty. Dear listeners, you have a slim volume in front of you, and if you haven't, it's your own fault. Marion will sell you the said tome. It contains 32. Tanya preempted me by considering them firecrackers, far more lethal. They're from the Mills grenade variety. These are 32 stories that have remnants of, they're reminiscent of the Alfred Hitchcock TV show, The Twilight Zone, The Great Mass of Bunwell. But more than all, they are quintessential Edward O'Dwyer. And I'm going to reiterate what I said many lunches ago. An Edward O'Dwyer lunch is never incident-free. First of all, we lost a microphone. I lost half a glass of wine. And, however, I always regarded Edward, when he was younger Edward, the child prodigy, as being, using a war analogy, a battlefield analogy, a war reporter from the game of life, which is all you practitioners out there. Don't worry, the city home is that way. Don't worry, it's the real deal. It's the only game in town life. And he comes back with these quirky, quixotic tales. Not a word of truth, of course. Far more interesting than what passes for ordinary life. Folks, buy The Man Who Became Poems. It will change your life. It will also change Edward's bank balance. Once again, I'd like to thank our musicians, Stuart and Sarah, for their endeavours. Right, good night.
Sometimes they don't really want to.